Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, earlier in February this year, the UK government released its Levelling Up manifesto, revealing its plans to drive innovation and economic growth while upskilling people and leading the way to a better society and more sustainable environment. In many ways, this is a microcosm of the wider world, and organisations on all corners of the globe should be striving to level up. And many will say that in doing so is absolutely key to delivering digital products and services faster, especially if they're planning on keeping up with customer demands and remaining competitive amid increasing market pace and competition. But the thing we all need to remember here is IT is essential to that, but they in turn need the right architecture, underpinned by composable applications, which research firm Gartner recently predicted will become a strategic objective for 60% of organisations by 2023, which is just 8 months away. While 80% will use an iterative experimental methods like lean, agile, and design thinking for service design. So to this end, IT and digital workflows will play a pivotal role. So in today's podcast episode, Andy Lockhart from ServiceNow will explore the non-negotiable need for workflows within organisations and also how companies can use the ServiceNow platform to level up and empower their IT teams. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Belfast, where Andy is waiting to take a deep dive with us in how organisations can level up. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Andy. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neil. So I'm Andy Lockhart. In case you can't tell from my accent, I'm based in Belfast, working for Fujitsu's UK and I ServiceNow practice. So been working in IT for 12 years now. Actually took a bit of a strange route into IT. I'm a sports science grad originally. Worked with the Irish national tennis team and then decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different. So retrained in IT for a American insurance firm in Belfast who offered that pathway and been working with ServiceNow ever since, thankfully. So been with ServiceNow 12 years, most recently becoming a certified master architect. So one of only, I think, 120 globally that ServiceNow have certified. So proud moment, a lot of hard graft went into that. So day to day, I kind of just help customers on their digital transformation journey using ServiceNow.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. We're talking about sports science to ServiceNow. So the question I've got to ask is, how did you get there? What was your origin story? And what was it that lit that passion or lit that spark for technology in you?
So the tennis coaching, I kind of fell into it almost as a result of doing sports science at uni. Enjoyed playing sports. I thought I would enjoy working in sport, but I think what I found was the more you work in it, the less you tend to play it. So I thought, to continue enjoying my sport, I'll change career path. And IT is the hot topic at the time. Belfast had opportunities in IT, thought it was the right time to retrain, put myself through some open university courses. And thankfully, the company that I joined were providing essentially a cross training for those with non-IT degrees into IT. I've always enjoyed logic. Essentially, some of the science behind sports science translates into the computer sciences very vaguely, but it allowed for transferable skills. So the logic side of things, as well as the coaching side of things, has helped in terms of consultancy, talking to customers. So it was really only the kind of the ones and zeros I had to learn from scratch.
Oh, what a great story. And of course, if we look back over the last 2 years alone, I think we've all witnessed the rise of remote working. Then it progressed to hybrid working. And then we had the great resignation and a skill shortage in the workplace. And even the CEO of Microsoft said, I think it was back in 2020, that they went through 2 years of digital transformation in just 2 months. So I'm curious, from the conversations you're having with businesses, can you offer an overview of the changing business climate that you're seeing, especially around the rising of consumer demands and increasing competition and trying to keep everyone happy in the workplace too?
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack there, I guess.
Yeah.
Customer demand side of things and market competition, we're definitely seeing Companies really trying to invest in moving at a greater speed, trying to understand where they can be flexible and resilience in their platforms. So we're seeing a lot more around risk and trying to ensure their products and platforms are resilient. The goal ultimately really being to have that kind of agile architecture to allow them to innovate, adopt a pace to stay ahead of the competitors. Everyone's trying to get to be the first to market really in terms of what they're doing. A lot lining back to that digital transformation that we've seen sort of pre-COVID in terms of a lot of companies moving into the digital space from kind of that antiquated, more legacy systems. I think what we're seeing a lot more recently is probably that shift towards no-code and low-code applications to kind of address that skills shortage. So you talked about the Great Resignation. I think that's a good point in terms of it's harder to get staff. ServiceNow is a microcosm of that. We're trying to hire at the moment. Everybody's trying to hire. I think supply does not meet the demand that there is for that resource pool. So I think the move towards low code and no code expands that resource pool to people who, a little bit like myself originally, maybe don't have the very detailed developer background. Moving towards that more of a low code, no code has kind of widened the potential skill base that you can hire from. I think another thing we're probably seeing aligned to that initial discussion around speed, flexibility, is the role of governance and planning has become more important probably in the last 2 years in terms of trying to understand where your roadmap is going, how you can do that in a sustainable way with regards to architecture.
And if we bring the IT department into this conversation, they did traditionally have that reputation for being perceived as blockers rather than business enablers in some circles, and much of that because they often said no, and also the length of time it can take to get a project live in quick time and under budget is notoriously difficult, and those words alone will resonate with every single business leader listening. But how have you seen the role of IT evolve over the last 2 years and help businesses be more agile and quicker?
I think it's become, IT was previously a bit of a blocker, as you said, the time it was taken to deliver things. I think what we've moved towards is IT being more of an enabler, something to solve those business problems rather than bring them to the forefront. If you look at the emergence of, let's say, automated intelligence in the recent past, we've seen more of a shift towards IT becoming more proactive, more an intelligent solution to try and identify those areas which could potentially be problematic before they happen, rather than historically kind of being that monitoring solution that then required human intervention. We're seeing a lot more of a shift towards that kind of automated intelligence, actual predictive planning. I think the other thing that we're seeing IT enable is possibly that move towards hybrid working that you talked about. Historically, those IT projects required a lot of people to be on site, workshops from multiple different partners, the logistics around getting everybody into those physical locations were time as well as costly. I think what we're seeing is that idea of supporting hybrid working or supporting remote working. ServiceNow, interestingly, has adopted that post-COVID and really rolled out the idea of workplace services. So that idea of kind of providing a workflow engine behind a hybrid working model. So trying to reduce your footprint in terms of physical real estate, where you can actually offer collaborative tools online, integrating with those channels such as Slack, Teams, things like that, allowing people to be more effective from remote locations means that IT can deliver those things cheaper, but also quicker because we don't need to get those people into the physical locations. Probably the other thing that's been a big switch in the last few years has probably been the adoption of DevOps. For me, it's kind of looking at more continuous implementation, continuous delivery, that idea of delivering incremental value rather than kind of that historical big bang of releasing value. But platforms being able to get an idea of what that DevOps pipeline looks like, where those potential problems are, where things are in delivery, and kind of having that single pane of where that value is being delivered, as well as tracking value. So things like project management, all being in one integrated system, allows for that kind of vision of timeliness as well as resource costing, kind of all tying back to IT being more of an enabler of delivering projects rather than something that's seen as potential blocker, I would say.
Yeah, 100% with you on that. And if we were to zoom out for a moment and look at that continuous journey that we've been on now, and the IT team of the role that IT have played in the last 2 years as well, what role do you see IT playing now and in the future as we look forward? What role do you see them playing in supporting the changing business climate that we mentioned a few moments ago? Because again, it feels like those goalposts are continuously moving, doesn't it?
Yeah, they definitely are. Everybody's always trying to get ahead of the competition. I suppose a couple of things there to be mindful of. IT kind of being more of that window into what the business is doing. Previously, there's a lot of reliance on spreadsheets, data warehouses, a lot of siloed data. I think what we're seeing, and what ServiceNow does well, is, I suppose, produce that single version of the truth, or that single pane into how a business operates. We spoke about it in the DevOps model, but I suppose you could roll that out across the entire IT infrastructure, having that view of what's going on. I suppose aligned to that, and where we see business going, I think we touched on it at the start of the call, Neil, around automated intelligence or predictive intelligence, really using AI to drive the business forward. I think as we move forward, we'll see companies put more trust in predictive intelligence, shift away from human intervention being the first point of contact and more to AI like virtual agents, but also maybe even more towards self-healing. So in the ITOM operations space, where we can have predictive problems or predictive intelligence, we can look at self-healing, and then a problem never becomes a problem because it's been solved before it happens. I think that's where we see IT moving to be more of almost a layer of protection for the business rather than something that's reactive to problems within the business.
And if we look in certain areas around IT, let's say aviation and airlines, airports, etc., they've got a huge amount of technical debt now because they just seem to be keep building on top of technology that was actually from the 60s. So that we're putting all this new shiny tech on top of things that were built back in the 60s. So I'm curious from that side of things, how vital do you think it is to have the right architecture and composable applications now? And is that something that you're seeing businesses wake up to as well?
Yeah, and interestingly, only in the last week, we've been talking to businesses about something which is architecture, but the need for governance. So as we look to, we've talked a little bit about moving at pace, having to stay ahead of your competition. I think to do that, you need the right foundations in place. And I think a lot of that foundation is the right architecture. But even before we get to that step of the right architecture, it's about governing what you have or governing what you're bringing in. And I think putting that in place, having the right decision makers in, having the right planning boards and a cadence to ensure that we are moving in a maintainable and future-proof way. I think as the rate of change increases to get ahead of competition, companies obviously want to reduce costs and increase value. That idea of composable applications then starts to really offer some strong benefits. Ease of automation, those new platforms bring out various extra products, ease of use, agility, things like that. I think having the right architecture in place to allow those applications to be easily brought on board, but also maybe potentially easily integrated with. So a lot of businesses are wanting various systems to talk to each other. So I think reusable APIs, ensuring the footprint is in place from an architectural point of view to allow companies to integrate with ease into those composable applications really does then begin to add a lot of benefit.
And if, let's say, an organization has the planning boards that you've mentioned there, and we're also looking at the C-suite or looking for the value add, do they all understand the importance of a future fit development approach now as well? Is that something you're seeing more and more embrace?
I think they're starting to listen. ServiceNow was interesting in the initial inception, early releases of ServiceNow. It was much more an idea of it could be developed on, and it was a developer system, allowing you to build a lot of customization. Over time, it's become more mature, and I think what ServiceNow are doing very well is starting to have biannual releases of significant functionality. But to allow customers to adopt that as quickly as possible, they need to be fairly out of the box. So what we try and work with is a term called upgradability. So managing our development on the ServiceNow platform to be what we kind of call business smart customization. So making changes that remain upgradable, but allow the customer to leverage the full value from the platform. But through doing that, it's kind of reducing that time to value whenever those releases come in so they can adopt the new products, the value that they offer. So your point around developing with future fit, I think we're seeing many, many more of our customers start to question any kind of customization, and it's kind of adopt the platform first and make their processes fit rather than adopt their processes and make the platform fit. So it's kind of the last couple of years, we've really had buy into that from most of our customers.
And just to bring it to life for any IT teams listening out there, how do IT workflows support everything that we've talked about today? And are they still essential to remain competitive and keep up with consumer demands, just to join it all together for the business leaders too?
I think so. There's a couple of different ways I think that they work. So I think we spoke a little bit about no code and low code, and I think that idea of IT workflows and building data-driven or decision tree-driven logic allows the business to really benefit and build on top of robust kind of that workflows that allow for informed decisions to be made without the need for human intervention. I think that allows businesses to remain competitive because the onus isn't on the people. It also increases the speed at which those workflows can be processed. So think about something like a potential request approval for a new laptop for a new starter. So we spoke a little about Great Resignation, people being unhappy, things like being able to process their requests quicker ultimately has a little bit of a knock-on effect to how happy they are at work. So if we can make that data driven, if we can drive a lot of that IT to be intelligent rather than relying on human intervention, obviously that return to value is quicker. We also touched on DevOps as a model. So I think when we look at kind of IT as a whole, I think having that single view into the development pipeline and having structures in place to allow for integrating with various other systems through those workflows really leverages value. So we talk about composable applications. Those applications may be in different systems, but having a single workflow that's able to integrate and pull all of the information from those systems into one place really adds significant value.
Absolutely. And if we do dare to look beyond digital transformation, do you think there is a degree of business transformation or changes in organizational culture that's also needed to keep up with increased market pace and competition? Because in many ways, the tech part is the easy part, isn't it? It's the culture change that can be a little trickier.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that already with hybrid working. Yeah. A lot of companies that previously wanted their people on site have been forced to have them remote during the pandemic, and I think that's brought about a change in itself. We're seeing much more of a hybrid or remote working environment these days. But I think in general, to kind of bring those users on the journey, I think organizational change management is very important. So that idea of kind of rather than doing things to people, bring them on the journey, having them bought in. And I think then what we'll see is early adoption from people in terms of those new ways of working, being able to have that return on value from investment in products, investment in platforms much, much quicker. I think the other thing we're probably seeing is the idea of citizen developers. So we talked about low code and no code, but delegating development to people who maybe previously didn't have that access to be able to do the things that they wanted to do. So if we talked about requests, or even if we think about change management, but delegating access to the people who own those processes to be able to develop their own workflows, be able to manage their own silos of work under that governance structure we talked about to ensure everything's being done in the right way, but empowering people to do more in their areas. Ultimately, we give them more value in what they do day to day. But looking back at that kind of skill shortage that we're seeing, being able to bring people in to do more than what they're currently doing will ultimately add value to both the business and those workers within the business.
And as we come to the end of today's episode, I'm curious, are there any other solutions that you think businesses should be striving to realise alongside those IT workflows? One
we're seeing a lot of, and I think is genuine for a lot of customers, is customer workflows. So it's a pretty easy step to make from IT workflow to start to focus on your customers, because ultimately, a lot of what you're putting into place for IT workflows is probably transferable to be customer facing. So really starting to leverage that customer facing aspect, reduce their problems, sort of mean time to resolution efficiencies for customers. The other thing that we're starting to see traction in, and obviously is a very sensitive issue, is the idea of what ServiceNow has deemed ESG management. So that kind of environmental, social, and governance aspect. So tying back to things such as, corporate responsibility, carbon footprint. So there's offerings within that space. And I think what we see is employees want their business to be doing more in this space. So I think being able to do it on the same platform as you're driving your IT workflow, as you're driving your customer workflow, adds significant value to both the business and kind of your external facing reputation.
Well, I've absolutely loved chatting with you today. I feel like we've covered so much in a short amount of time. But before I do let you go, I always like to ask my guests to leave everyone listening with a personal touch of inspiration by sharing maybe a book that has inspired them in their life, or maybe a song or piece of music that helps them get their head in the zone or just important to you. My big question is, though, what will you leave us with today? And is there a story to accompany your choice?
My music is not is a little bit diverse, so I went with a book to stay safe. So I've gone with a book called Made to Stick. It's by two brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, and it's really about what makes ideas sticky almost, but certainly what makes ideas, what makes people invest in your ideas or buy into your ideas. And it's kind of the cheesier ideas sometimes may be the ones that stick because they're the memorable ones rather than the really long ones. So not a massive story behind it, but it was during the CMA course, the Certified Master Architect course, I talked about at the top of the podcast. We always had guest speakers. So a gentleman called Matty Abrams, who heads up the Stanford School of Business, came on to speak to us about business. So nothing technical or anything, but he introduced this book, and it's something that I found a lot of value in. So hopefully your listeners do too.
Awesome. Well, I'll add that to our Amazon wish list. I am kind of curious what your guilty pleasures are and diverse music taste consist, but I'll let you off the hook this time. But anyone listening, where can they find you online, contact your team, explore more information about any of the topics we've talked about today? What's the best starting point?
Personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's pretty much where I do a lot of my postings. The team themselves, you can find at fujitsu.com/ServiceNow. That's our partner site. So any information you need to find can mostly be found there or through the usual kind of social media channels.
Excellent. Well, I've loved exploring the non-negotiable need for workflows within organizations, and also exploring how companies can use the Now platform to level up and empower their IT teams. But more than anything, all washed down with your very personal story and a great book to leave us with too. So thanks for joining me today, Andy.
Thanks very much.
As we said at the very beginning of this podcast, IT and digital workflows will play a pivotal role in helping organisations deliver products and services much, much faster, to empower them to keep up with customer demands and remain competitive amid increased market pace and competition. But how are you doing this? How are you levelling up? What are your challenges? What have you found easier? What have been your biggest challenges? As always, let me know. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And you can also check out this episode along with over 2,000 other interviews over at my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. So please keep your stories coming in. If you'd like to join me on the podcast, let me know. Other than that, I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.